The fog of Victorian London was not merely weather. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of coal smoke and river damp that turned the sprawling metropolis into a labyrinth of shadows. In the year 1837, the city was the beating heart of an empire, a place of immense wealth and crushing poverty, where the newly installed gas lamps flickered vainly against the encroaching dark. It was a time of transition, standing on the precipice between the superstitions of the past and the industrial machinery of the future. But in the narrow alleyways and the lonely commons, something was moving that defied both science and religion. It was not a ghost, though it possessed the ethereal quality of a phantom. It was not a man, though it wore the clothes of a gentleman. It was a predator that would terrorize the imagination of the world for a century. Welcome to DCF Investigations. Tonight, we open the case file on one of history's most baffling and terrifying enigmas. A figure who leapt from the nightmares of folklore into the police reports of Scotland Yard. Tonight, we hunt for Spring-Heeled Jack. To understand the sheer panic that gripped London, we must first immerse ourselves in the psychology of the era. The year 1837 marked the beginning of Queen Victoria's reign. The Industrial Revolution was tearing up the landscape, bringing trains, factories, and a massive influx of people into the city. The Metropolitan Police, known as the Peelers, were a relatively new force, established only a few years prior in 1829. They were few in number, poorly equipped, and viewed with suspicion by the working class. The streets at night were not the safe, illuminated thoroughfares we know today. They were domains of silence and danger, where a single wrong turn could lead to a cutthroat's knife or the icy waters of the Thames. It was in this atmosphere of uncertainty that the rumors began. They started as whispers in the taverns and tea-houses of the distinct villages surrounding London. People spoke of a shape-shifting entity. In Barnes Common, locals reported a large white bull that would attack pedestrians before vanishing into thin air. In other areas, it was described as a white bear or a spectral figure in armor. These early accounts were fragmented, dismissed by the educated elite as the gin-soaked hallucinations of the lower classes. But the entity was evolving. It was testing its boundaries, refining its method of terror. The shapeless ghost was becoming something solid, something with a cruel and specific intelligence. The first concrete incident that transformed the legend into a criminal investigation occurred in September of 1837. A young woman named purely as Polly Adams was walking through the darker recesses of Blackheath. She was approached by 3 men, or so she thought. But the encounter quickly devolved into nightmare. One of the figures broke away, assaulting her with a violence that was shocking even for the rough standards of the time. He tore at her clothes, his hands described as cold and clammy, like the claws of a corpse. But it was not just a physical assault. The attacker touched her flesh with his talons, leaving her in a catatonic state. This was not a robbery. It was an exercise in terror. Following Polly Adams, the attacks accelerated, moving geographically like a contagion. In Clapham, a woman named Mary Stevens was walking to Lavender Hill. It was late, the streets deserted. As she passed through Clapham Common, a figure leapt out from the darkness. Note the word leaped. This was not a stumble or a run. Witnesses and victims began to consistently describe an inhuman agility. The figure grabbed Mary Stevens, kissing her face with a violence that felt like wire wool, and began to rip her clothes apart with claws that were undeniably metallic. When her screams finally drew the attention of residents, the attacker did not run away. He vaulted over a 9-foot wall with the ease of a bird taking flight. This detail, the impossible jump, would become his calling card. By late 1837, the disparate reports had coalesced into a single, terrifying profile. The entity was male. He was tall, thin, and powerful. He wore a tight-fitting oilskin suit, often described as white or shimmering, and a long, dark cloak that billowed like bat wings. But the most horrifying details were in the face. Witnesses spoke of eyes that burned like balls of fire, and ears that were pointed and cropped like an animal's. And then there was the fire. Victims reported that when cornered, the creature would open his mouth and vomit forth a stream of blue and white flame, stunning his prey before making his escape. The panic reached such a fever pitch that it could no longer be ignored by the authorities. In January 1838, the Lord Mayor of London, Sir John Cowan, held a public session at the Mansion House to address the growing hysteria. He revealed a letter he had received from a resident of Peckham. This letter is a crucial piece of evidence in the DCF investigation because it suggests a motive that was neither supernatural nor purely criminal, but something sociopathic. The letter writer claimed that the terror was the result of a wager. It stated that a group of reckless aristocrats had bet £5,000 that one of them could not adopt a terrifying disguise and visit 3 different villages near London, frightening the inhabitants out of their wits. This theory, that Spring-Heeled Jack was a bored, wealthy sadist, gave the public a target, but it did nothing to stop the attacks. In fact, the most infamous incident was yet to come. The date was February 19th, 1838. The location was Old Ford, a hamlet in the East End of London. Jane Alsop, a young woman living with her father and sisters, heard a violent ringing at the front gate. It was night, and the fog was thick. When she opened the door, she saw a man standing in the shadows, his face obscured. He identified himself as a police officer and claimed, with a frantic urgency, that they had caught Spring-Heeled Jack in the lane nearby. He asked her to bring a light. Jane, acting out of civic duty, rushed to fetch a candle. She returned to the door and handed it to the stranger. In the flickering light of that candle, the deception was revealed. The man threw off his outer cloak. He was wearing a tight-fitting white costume that gleamed like oilskin. His eyes were red and glowing. Before Jane could scream, he grabbed her by the neck and placed her head under his arm. The report states that he began to tear at her gown with claws made of a metallic substance. Jane tried to pull away, but the attacker held her fast. He then leaned in and spewed blue and white flames from his mouth directly into her face. This detail is critical to our analysis. The blue flame suggests a chemical compound, likely phosphorus or alcohol mixed with specific salts, a trick known to stage magicians and fire eaters of the time. This supports the theory of a human perpetrator using theatrical devices. Jane's sister, hearing the struggle, rushed to the door and dragged Jane back inside, slamming it shut. But the creature was not done. He began to batter the door, ringing the bell furiously until neighbors arrived, causing him to flee across the fields with his signature bounding stride. Jane Alsop was left traumatized. her clothes shredded, her skin marked by the claws. This was not a ghost story. This was a violent home invasion. Only days later, on February 28, 1838, the terror struck again in Limehouse. Lucy Scales, an 18-year-old butcher's daughter, was walking home with her sister Margaret. They were passing through Green Dragon Alley, a narrow, desolate passage. As they walked, Lucy noticed a tall figure standing in the shadows, wrapped in a large cloak. As she approached, the figure did not speak. He simply stepped forward and blew a blast of blue fire into her face. Lucy was blinded and instantly fell to the ground in a violent seizure that lasted for hours. The attacker did not touch her. He did not try to rip her clothes. He simply walked away, vanishing into the gloom. This shift in modus operandi is puzzling. Was it the same man? Or was it a copycat, inspired by the newspaper reports of the Alsop attack? The investigation that followed was chaotic. The police arrested several men, including a carpenter named Thomas Milbank, who had been overheard boasting in a pub that he was Spring-Heeled Jack. Milbank had even dropped a white overall and a greatcoat outside the house of a victim. However, when brought to trial, the case collapsed. Milbank could not breathe fire, and he lacked the mechanical apparatus required to make the impossible leaps witnesses described. The court could not reconcile the drunk carpenter with the agile demon. Milbank was released, and the true identity of the attacker remained a mystery. This brings us to the most compelling suspect in the history of the case, Henry de la Poer Beresford, the third Marquess of Waterford. Known to the public as the Mad Marquess, Waterford was the archetype of the dissolute Victorian aristocrat. He was immensely wealthy, violently strong, and possessed a cruel, sadistic sense of humor. He was known for vandalism, fighting brawls with bouncers, and terrorizing the populace for his own amusement. The phrase "painting the town red" actually originates from one of his exploits in Melton Mowbray, where he literally painted the toll gate and several buildings red during a drunken rampage. Waterford fits the profile perfectly. He had the money to construct complex costumes and spring-loaded boots. He had the arrogance to believe he was above the law. He had a history of misogyny and violence against women. Furthermore, he had friends in the scientific community who could have supplied him with the chemical mixtures to create the blue fire breath. The timing also aligns. The most intense period of attacks ceased around the time Waterford married and settled down in Ireland in 1842. It is entirely plausible that the wager mentioned in the Lord Mayor's letter was real, and that Waterford was the principal actor. However, there are flaws in the Waterford theory. The primary issue is the physics of the leap. Witnesses consistently reported Jack jumping over 9-foot walls and clearing entire houses. Even with the best spring technology of the 1830s, or indeed the 2020s, such controlled vertical leaps are physically impossible for a human being without heavy, obvious machinery. A man wearing spring-loaded heels would likely break his ankles upon landing, not continue running. This discrepancy forces us to consider other possibilities. Was the jumping exaggerated by hysterical witnesses? Or was there something else at work? As the Victorian era progressed, Spring-Heeled Jack changed. He ceased to be merely a London phenomenon and became a nationwide bogeyman. Sightings were reported in Northamptonshire, in the Midlands, and eventually in the military strongholds of the empire. In the 1870s, the legend took a bizarre turn when it intersected with the British Army. In August 1877, at the Aldershot Barracks, one of the most secure military installations in the world. Sentries began reporting encounters with a figure fitting Jack's description. One sentry, standing guard at the North Camp, claimed a figure appeared out of the darkness and slapped him across the face with an icy hand. The soldier fired his rifle, but the figure bounded away with a laughing, metallic cackle. This incident is significant because it involves trained observers, professional soldiers who were armed and on high alert. They were not prone to flights of fancy in the same way a terrified civilian might be. The fact that the intruder could breach a military base, assault a guard, and escape without being shot suggests a level of skill and planning that goes beyond a simple prank. The panic at Aldershot became so severe that sentries were given orders to shoot on sight. But the entity was never caught. The descriptions from this era often included details of a helmet or a tight-fitting cowl, fueling modern speculation that the entity might have been an early test pilot for some secret military technology. Or perhaps, for those inclined to the paranormal, an extraterrestrial visitor struggling with Earth's gravity. The final major outbreak of spring-heeled Jack hysteria occurred in Liverpool in 1904, nearly 70 years after the first sightings. In Everton, terrified residents reported a man leaping from rooftop to rooftop. The police were called, and a massive crowd gathered, watching the figure bound across the slates. At one point, the entity was cornered on a high roof. As the police closed in, he reportedly bowed to the crowd and then leapt an impossible distance, landing safely and vanishing. This event marked the end of the classic era of spring-heeled Jack. The world was changing. The gas lamps were being replaced by electric lights. The shadows where Jack hid were being illuminated. The rise of the automobiles and the modern forensic age made it difficult for a costumed eccentric to operate with impunity. But the question remains, what was spring-heeled Jack? If we strip away the folklore and the penny-dreadful exaggerations, we are left with a series of violent assaults on women, characterized by a specific modus operandi involving disguise, fire, and claws. This suggests a serial predator. The fact that the attack stopped and started over decades implies either a legacy, a mantle passed from one individual to another, or a phenomenon of mass hysteria where every shadow became the monster. We must also consider the psychological landscape. Spring-heeled Jack appeared at moments of social tension. In the 1830s, it was the fear of the new urban sprawl. In the 1870s, it was anxiety about military preparedness. In 1904, it was the uncertainty of the new century. Jack was a screen onto which the Victorians projected their fears. He was the chaotic element in an increasingly ordered society. He was the thing that the police, with all their new rules and uniforms, could not catch. There is a darker theory, one that moves away from the mad Marquess and into the realm of the occult. Some contemporary researchers have pointed out the similarities between the descriptions of Jack and the entities reported in modern high-strangeness cases. The glowing red eyes, the metallic suit, the impossible movement, and the sulfurous smell are all staples of demonology and, later, alien encounter folklore. Was spring-heeled Jack an interdimensional entity? A trickster spirit that feeds on fear? The sheer longevity of the phenomenon, spanning almost a century, makes it difficult to pin on a single human lifespan unless we accept the idea of a secret society continuing the tradition. Let us look closer at the forensic evidence, or rather, the lack thereof. In the case of Jane Alsop, the police found the candle she had dropped, and they noted the marks on her neck and the tears in her dress. These were physical realities. The attacker existed. He was flesh and blood. The failure to catch him lies in the limitations of 1830s policing. There were no fingerprints, no DNA profiling, no CCTV. If a wealthy aristocrat like Waterford was involved, his status would have shielded him. The police were deferential to the nobility. It is entirely possible that the authorities knew exactly who it was, but were powerless or unwilling to arrest a peer of the realm. The Lord Mayor's letter about the wager might have been a way of managing the public, acknowledging the crime while framing it as a gentleman's folly rather than the act of a monster. But the legend outgrew the man, even if Waterford was the original Jack. The copycats and the hallucinations took on a life of their own. The name Spring-Heeled Jack became a catch-all term for any strange occurrence at night. It became a tool for social control. Parents would tell their children to behave, or Jack would get them. It became a staple of horror fiction, influencing the creation of comic book heroes and villains a century later. The Batman, with his cape and cowl and use of fear as a weapon, owes a debt to the Victorian leaping terror. The Joker, with his grotesque grin and madness, mirrors the chaotic nature of Jack. As we analyze the timeline minute by minute, we see gaps that cannot be filled by conventional explanations. How did the attacker in the Lucy Scales case induce a seizure without physical contact? Was it a chemical spray, a primitive nerve agent, or sheer psychological trauma? How did the figure at Aldershot survive rifle fire? Was it a bulletproof vest, or did the soldiers miss in their panic? Every answer we find spawns two more questions. Today, the case of Spring-Heeled Jack remains technically open, in the sense that no one was ever convicted for the assaults on Mary Stevens, Jane Alsop, or Lucy Scales. The files gathered dust in the archives of London, a testament to a time when the night belonged to the monster. The streets of London are brighter now. The fog has lifted. But the legacy of Spring-Heeled Jack endures. He represents the ultimate unsolved mystery, the perfect crime committed over and over again in plain sight. He is the reminder that no matter how civilized we become, there are still things in the dark that we cannot explain, catch, or kill. In the end, Spring-Heeled Jack is more than a criminal. He is a mirror reflecting the anxieties of his time and perhaps of ours. We look for rational explanations, the springs, the phosphorus, the aristocrat. Because the alternative is too unsettling to accept. The alternative is that something walked the streets of London that was not bound by our laws of physics or our morality. Something that enjoyed the scream of the victim and the heat of the flame. This has been a deep dive into the archives of DCF Investigations. We have walked the cobbles of Victorian London and stared into the red eyes of the legend. But the investigation does not end here. We want to hear your theories. Was the Marquess of Waterford the culprit behind the mask? Was it a multi-generational conspiracy of the elite? Or was it something truly paranormal that visited humanity and then moved on? Leave your detailed analysis in the comments below. If you have any information or local legends regarding similar entities in your own region, share them. The patterns of history often repeat, and it is only by connecting the dots that we can hope to understand the anomalies of our world. Until next time, keep your eyes on the shadows and stay curious.